Hi, my name is Katie, and today we'll be talking about racial discrimination in the police force. Imagine for a moment that you are walking home from work when an officer runs up behind you and demands for your ID. His hand is on his gun holster as you keep your hands raised, and if you slightly move, you may get shot. For many people of color, this scenario is all too real, and in many cases ends in unarmed civilians beaten or killed by police officers, suspecting them of a crime. Upon heavy research into the police and judicial system, it is with a heavy heart to report that institutional racism does still exist in the police force and is responsible for the destruction of countless lives in America. Now I will discuss some of the major problems of the judicial system and how it's inflicting racial discrimination. Firstly, the number of police brutality cases are growing in the United States as hundreds of unarmed people are being killed by excessive force. Here are just 3 recent cases gathered by Madison Park, a journalist for CNN, involving unarmed citizens being killed by police. In each one of these cases, all the officers involved were free from any convictions. In July 2014, Eric Garner, 43, was tackled to the ground and held in a chokehold for allegedly selling cigarettes outside of a supermarket. Garner repeatedly cried, "I can't breathe," until losing consciousness completely. The very next month, Michael Brown, only 18 years old, was shot 12 times by police officers, despite being unarmed. July 2016, Philip Castile, 32, was fatally shot during a traffic stop after allegedly reaching for his driver's license. In September of this year, a research collaborative website called Mapping Police Violence, dedicated toward collecting data on police killings, reported in 2018 that 13 of the 100 largest U.S. city police departments are responsible for killing Black men at higher rates than the U.S. murder rate. As this data suggests, if you are a Black individual, and you are more likely to be killed by an officer of law than of anyone else of murder. But aren't police supposed to protect our civilians? Aren't they supposed to prevent blood being spilt in the streets? People of color no longer feel safe as countless of their neighbors are being unfairly harassed and killed by officers of the law, and little has been done to hold these officers accountable. These increase of police killings brings me to my second point, that corruption in the police system is further dividing the relationship between community and police. Criminology professor at University of Maryland, Brian Johnson, examines the relationship between ethnic communities and judicial punishment. He discusses racial group threat perspectives, in which growing minority communities can fuel heightened perceptions of threat, thus transferring to negative perceptions by the police. These negative perceptions held by the police toward ethnic groups contributes to how frequently they choose to use excessive force when dealing with these individuals. As cases of death by cop arise, people of color grow more wary of police, wondering who will be next. Ethnic communities recognize that they are being treated unequally and more hostile by officers. After all, we should feel protected by the law enforcement, but as cases like these continue to hit the news, more live in fear. Thirdly, the flaws in the structure of the police system allows for racial inequality to continue. The way in which the police system is structured gives way to racial discrimination, and as in many cases, police are instructed to often target low-income ethnic communities to make as many arrests, citations, arrests, and stop and frisk reports as possible. Avram Bornstein, professor for John Jay College, examines racial disparity in enforcement outcomes in the New York City Police Department. Bornstein found that the numbers-driven system CompStat employed in the NYPD, along with their zero-tolerance policy to misdemeanors and violations, promotes institutional racism. He explains, quote, "In contrast, zero tolerance discourages police discretion and creative problem-solving, and instead makes summons or arrests the first rather than the last choice of action." Lastly, the lack of reporting incidences of police brutality is sustaining a harmful system of inequality. Statistics from the U.S. Department of Justice in 2017 report that 52% of police officers report that it is not unusual for law enforcement to turn a blind eye to improper conduct of their colleagues. University of South Carolina criminologist Jeff Albert, who has long studied police use of deadly force, said the FBI's limited database underscores a gaping hole in the nation's understanding of how often local police take lives on American streets. So much of police injustices are occurring below the radar. The officers often act with impunity, knowing that they rarely get caught. There's a time to declare that enough is enough, and we need to protect each other from discrimination and brutality of any kind, which brings me to my two solutions. First, we need to be aware of the inconsistencies exhibited by the police and recognize that there are flaws to the system. We need to acknowledge that although there are a lot of officers that are doing an outstanding job protecting every citizen, there are still many officers that are inflicting pain on the community and abusing the system. Senior editor Nick Flateau wrote a piece for Think Progress, a liberal blog examining police punishment. In his article, he discusses the case of Rodney King, a young black man beaten by police batons over 50 times. All of the 20 police officers involved in the beating were acquitted. But however, after 5 days of intense protests in the streets of LA, the cops in the case were ultimately held accountable, and the federal prosecutors secured 4 convictions of the officers. If it wasn't for the people of LA protesting against this injustice, those 4 cops may never have been prosecuted, and they may have been continuing to work today. We need to educate each other on the injustices that take place behind the scenes and refuse for this police department to sweep these cases under the rug. Second, we must demand for proper and accurate reporting of all cases of brutality and police injustices. And we need to hold officers accountable of any degree of involvement. Implementing a system in which police are legally required to report cases involving themselves as well as their colleagues can help establish accountability across all police officials in maintaining proper conduct. University of Nebraska criminologist Samuel Walker, who has conducted extensive research on police force issues, called the lack of national repository database a major failure of the criminal justice system. We all must come to the consensus that without proper in-depth reporting of officers' use of excessive force, police brutality will continue. In conclusion today, I've discussed the flaws in the police system that is perpetuating violence and institutional racism toward communities of color. We have discussed some of the major problems in the police system that are promoting cases of brutality amongst ethnic communities and the lack of discipline for such misconduct. It is our responsibility to be aware of the flaws of the system and to bring officers to justice who have committed these atrocious crimes. The responsibility for the police is to protect and serve the community, but upon discussing some of the statistics here today, I leave you with one question. Do you feel safe?